with you, I mean, you work in the mental health arena, but when you look at your own values for mind, and I'll even say that mental state, what is that? And what do you do to foster that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of mindfulness meditation. So as part of my daily routine, when I'm out doing my best, I'm sitting 25 minutes a morning in silent meditation. And sometimes when I'm really doing great, it's twice a day. Now, the research on it is overwhelming, whether it's from Harvard, Stanford, the University of Massachusetts, at Amherst. It's just, this is not airy-fairy stuff, man. Like, great mindfulness meditation practices change the physical structure of your brain and your mindset and your mood state, right? So, and your perceptive appreciation of the world.
Ian, we were just talking offline about spiritual context. And of course, I know you, got in contact with you through Michael Hyatt, which everybody knows is a guy of faith. I know you have been in the role of pastor. You're not right now, correct? But that has been part of your evolution. So tell me, I do love the premise though, that today, here you are in your own evolution, great term to start off with, and tell me where you would say, these are my values from a spiritual viewpoint.
Yeah. That's a great question. Yes, I went to seminary 3 times. One to get an MDiv, another time to get an MA in counseling psychology, and then another time working on my doctorate at Fordham University, the Catholic University of New York. So yes, obviously I am an Episcopal priest, and although I don't have a parish now, I continue to volunteer at the Episcopal chapel at Vanderbilt University. So I'm there on Sundays helping when they need it, but I am an unpaid dude, which is the best way to work for a church. Yeah, I mean, so that's been a big feature of my life. I would also say, and this is also a huge part of my life, Kevin, as we spoke about on that last show together, I'm been in 12-step recovery for well over 30 years for an alcohol and drug addiction back in the day. So I go to probably 5 12-step recovery meetings a week.
Oh, wow.
And, what people don't realize about 12-step recovery work is that the founder of it realized that the problem that alcoholics and drug addicts had was principally spiritual, and that the only solution for that problem would be spiritual. So 12-step spirituality, in addition to the life I have as a self-identified Christian, so I'm a little bit of a blend, Kevin, of those two things. And one has illuminated the other beautifully over the last couple of decades.
How does that look like? You said from a 12-step that 5 meetings per week, that's a big commitment, but just from a spiritual practices investment, what's that look like for you on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Well, sometimes one of my frustrations in the Christian tradition is it tends to be a belief-based system. Like if I just give my assent to these theological ideas, then I am a spiritual person, or I'm a saved person, or whatever word you want to use for it. Whereas the 12-step tradition is a practice-based spirituality, right? It's all about practices. It's not about beliefs as much as it is about practices. So for me, what that looks like is I work the steps every day. For me, my life is all about admitting my brokenness. It's about realizing there's a power greater than myself that can restore me to sanity every single day, that I have to be honest with myself and others. I got to work on my resentments. I have to be ultimately of service to the world through a posture of love and tolerance and self-sacrifice. Man, that's what the whole 12-step program about. People tend to think it's, how do I just stay abstinent? It's not at all what that is. That's like the very first thing you do. After that, it becomes all that I just said.
It's interesting you say that about belief, Ian, especially as a professed Christian. I don't know if you know a guy, he's passed away now, Anthony DeMello. He was a Jesuit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I'm a fan. Got a lot of his stuff. And in his book, Awareness, which I actually found through Tim Ferriss, oddly enough, uh, in his book, Awareness, he really takes aim at belief and kind of how easy for you to just slap a belief on something and not, in essence, in my paraphrasing, and not question and not work it out. And as you said, and not practice that. How does that look as opposed to just my upbringing in Christianity was more of it's just what I believe. It's not up for question. Actually, question it as blasphemous. We do not question that. And so it's interesting to hear you counter a belief-based system with a practice-based. I've not heard it in that way. That's profound.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say that the Christian world doesn't have practices. I'm just saying it tends to be dominantly about belief and theology. And the thing I love about DeMello, first of all, is that because I studied at a Jesuit university, and so I'm really familiar with his work.
Okay, great.
He would say, as well as the great Catholic writer Ronald Rolheiser, they both would say that the whole point of the Christian tradition is to wake up, right? It's all about waking up. And that's one of the reasons we talk about the Enneagram is it's like one of the things I love about the Enneagram is as it's just one of many tools that helps people wake up spiritually to who they are, and to who they could be. So, that's been a big mission in my life.
Is it, I'm going to assume this, but I'll ask it. Do you I would guess you struggle to even understand your own book, the Enneagram and the book, to understand it outside of a spiritual context, just as you're talking about, because I'm well aware of that. And we talked about it on the show that AA 12 step. I mean, they really couldn't, what they created was of a spiritual nature. They couldn't really do it outside of that. Is that what you find with the Enneagram? We're talking about our own story, that it's very hard to reconcile that without a spiritual context.
It's very interesting, Kevin, because you can approach the Enneagram from an exclusively psychological perspective. So when I go work with Fortune 500 companies, I can't talk about spirituality, right? I'll get thrown out of the room.
Okay.
But I can then go to other groups, sometimes with Silicon Valley companies, they're much more open to talking about spirituality as long as it's not specifically Christian or Jewish or whatever. But for me, I would say looking at the Enneagram through a Christian or spiritual lens brings it to life in a way that doesn't happen when you look at it solely through a psychological lens.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, relationships is our next one. And I'll come to that. I would come to something you said about your work with folks, but I'll start off just with you. Relationships. Tell me what bubbles to the surface when I ask that. It sounds elementary, but as you know, it's not, of what your primary values are today when you look at your relationships, intimate, family, friends, and on.
Man, it's I recently had a guy on typology. I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head. Anyway, he was the guy in charge of the Harvard study on happiness. Did you happen to see that study?
Are you kidding? Robert Waldinger. So we had him.
Yes.
Yeah, man. I had him on the show a few months back. It was incredible. We connected in such a way. He's a primary endorsement for my book, which you'll appreciate.
Oh, wow.
And I have Arthur Brooks coming on the show in about a month, and I'm going to have Robert come on and co-host a segment with me about Arthur and his message and his new book, Strength to Strength. So yes, you've got me at hello. I'm a fan of Robert. What a dear soul. And I've talked to a lot of people don't know him. And then I'll mention, he did this TED talk on, study on happiness and 45 million views. Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah. Incredible guy.
So of course, then, the results of the study, right? That ultimately it's the quality of our relationships that determines whether or not we've had a happy life. Yes. Right. So that's why, I would say that's why relationships, are the most important thing in my own life. Have they always been? No. As a younger man, of course, I went and pursued other things more than I did the quality of my relationships. But now I would definitely say that relationships sit at the top of my value my hierarchy of values, right? I'll give you an example of this. I have a rule that I have 3 children, and I contact them by FaceTime or text every single day, multiple times on texts. I'm not a they're all adult children, but I'm not a helicopter parent. I'm not an annoying parent. It's just, I want those relationships to be at the center of my world, right? The same with my wife. My wife and I are very concerned with issues around self-transformation and wellness. We spend a lot of time together, engaged in conversation or going to workshops, or we all kinds of things that help us to connect at the level of relationships. So I'm with Waldinger, man. Like, at the end of the day, the thing that's going to matter most is the quality of your relationships. And so again, at the very, very top of my hierarchy of values is relationships.
Well, let me ask you then, as a professed 4 on the Enneagram, which you said you are, what are your, going to that kind of a best and worst of you in relationships? So as a 4 with that propensity, what's the best of you in relationships? And then what do you have to guard yourself against?
Sure. Well, by way of reminder, the individualist, or the romantic as we're called, are people who are motivated to be special and unique as a way to compensate for what they perceive is something missing in their essential makeup, that if they're going to fit in the world, they're going to have to take care of, right? And they see everybody else as having this missing piece, and so they end up envying other people, but also feeling like, I'm different. I'm on the aisle of misfit toys. I don't fit, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that Enneagram 4s have to work on is they can be very emotionally intense people who want to dive deep and connect with other people very, very quickly at the deepest levels. We don't like small talk very much, man. Like, let's get down to the deep, ultimate questions of life. That can be kind of overwhelming to people sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, it could be a little too intense. So if you're not a self-aware 4, man, you could like just kind of, also become a little self-absorbed, temperamental, and hard to manage. That's if you're not a very self-aware 4. The gift you bring to relationships, more than any other type on the Enneagram, 4s are the most empathic.
Oh.
You can tell me anything, Gavin. You can tell me the worst secrets you have, and I won't blink. In fact, the first thing I'll probably do is I might cry with you. Or I might just go, man, keep telling me. I want to hear more about that. No judgment, no criticism, no shock, because I understand that life, because of my type, life is hard and suffering's part of it. And how do we make something better out of it? That's my gift, or one of my gifts in relationships.
Goodness. Well, that makes sense in regards to the position that you have. And as a practitioner, a therapist, but also in the hearts of a lot of people like Michael Hyatt, who obviously is so connected with you. Health and wellness, Ian, is the next one. Tell me about, it's kind of the most tangible one of this list, but health and wellness, what values rise to the surface when I give you that category?
Wow, that's a big one. Well, so I'm very, very fortunate because I am married to a health nut. Okay. Like my wife and I are plant-based people. That's how we eat. We go to hot yoga. I mean, the serious, not club yoga. I'm talking about the real deal, Bikram yoga, 4 mornings a week. I am do a regular, probably, let me see, I'd say at least 20 to 25 miles a week of fast walking or running. And as I mentioned earlier, man, like my wife and I are, I don't want to say we're not self-help junkies. I'm well past believing that's going to solve everything. But we are people who are interested in developing self-knowledge, spirituality, engaging the world at deep levels. And so that involves reading a ton. I just mentioned the Waldinger book, or I'm reading all the time. Wellness to me is being involved in a 12-step community, as I mentioned. Wellness to me is attending interesting workshops and experiential workshops around the country and sometimes the world in order to develop into the best expression of who I am. So yeah, this health and wellness thing, man, everything from nutrition to, physical stuff, et cetera, et cetera. It's a big deal.
Any specific resource, especially when you talk about plant-based and whatnot, do you have any specific resources or folks that you turn to for guidance in those directions?
Yeah. I mean, on the nutrition side, there's a really interesting book. And it's called, the title of the book is How Not to Die. And it's a really nice introduction by a guy named Michael Greger, MD, Greger. Discover the foods scientifically proven to prevent and reverse disease. So that was a big introduction to us to the plant-based world.
Yeah.
I'm not a guy who's like a militant vegan or an obnoxious vegan. I wear leather belts and I don't make my own clothes. It's really, for me, it's just about healthy eating, man. Like, and if it helps the planet, fantastic. But I'm more interested in keeping sugars and cholesterol low and, all that stuff.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate that. We spent a couple years vegan and it felt like a religion, actually. It was so antisocial. It was hard to withstand. My wife now calls us flexitarians. It kind of goes with the 80-20 rule. So yeah.
We aren't crusaders at all. It's just a personal nutrition decision.
Crusade. That's actually a funny way to say that. I know some crusaders. Yeah. I don't want to be a crusader with that. All right. Now you kind of went into this. The next category is mind and mental health. And you said that is you didn't say that specifically. You said that is your pursuit. I mean, in essence, that is a primary pursuit of yours is that health. And obviously, as a therapist and now a coach and consultant and whatnot. But when you look at that, and I've been lately interested even in the personal mental state. I hadn't thought about it for myself, but like today, what is I want mental health. Of course I do. I want some things to alter my mind. And for me, of course, I'm edging towards, being optimistic and excited about things, whatever. But what about mental state? And I had not put that as a forerunning thought and wasn't aware of my mental states, often just anxiety and just, even if I'm excited about stuff, so what am I doing for my mental state that's helped me really look better at meditation and whatnot? So with that preface, with you, you work in the mental health arena, but when you look at your own values for mind, and I'll even say that mental state, what is that? And what do you do to foster that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of mindfulness meditation. So as part of my daily routine, when I'm out doing my best, I'm sitting 25 minutes a morning in silent meditation. And sometimes when I'm really doing great, it's twice a day. Now the research on it is overwhelming, whether it's from Harvard, Stanford, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. This is not airy-fairy stuff, man. Like, great mindfulness meditation practices change the physical structure of your brain and your mindset and your mood state, right? So, and your perceptive appreciation of the world. It raises empathy. These are facts of research, right? So I'm always telling people, this is not me talking like a Hindi guru in the mountains of India. This is the science. Okay, this is the science. So in terms of the mental life, to me, meditation has been a gigantic thing. I went recently on a retreat. It was led by a Buddhist, and I'm one of these guys who's like, I can learn from anybody, even though I'm a Christian. I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm a critical thinker too. I'm gonna take what's great and I'm gonna leave what maybe not my thing.
Right.
We did 6 to 7 hours of sitting meditation a day. It was one of the most transformative experiences of my life, and so that's definitely one in the mental health world. Obviously, I see a therapist. I different times of my life for different reasons. Sometimes because I had a fire somewhere burning, and sometimes just because it's a good way to grow the soul.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm. To me, great exercise is really important in the mental state, the mood state. So Man, it's all integrated stuff, right? Everything you've just mentioned so far overlaps in a lot of ways.
Well, it does. It does. In this, I do want to ask in regards to the Enneagram that I assume that, let's just take your patients. If you're sitting in front of the next, patient in therapy and knowing their Enneagram results and getting that, can you feel fairly spot on where they are going to be at risk from a mental health standpoint? Meaning,
Absolutely.
and that's our opportunity then in the Enneagram is to understand that. Okay. Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, so let's say you're an Enneagram 3, as you, for the present moment, you self-identify as a 3.
Yeah.
They're called the performers, the achievers. So when you're not doing well, you tend to think that your value and your worth is tied to success, achievement, productivity, to crushing it in the world, because you think that that's what you're valued for, or people are valued for accomplishment more than they are for who they are inside. Mm-hmm. Right. So I know if you come into me and you're a 3, at the very least, we are probably going to have a conversation around that broken story or that set of false beliefs. Yeah. Right. So maybe that might answer the question for you.
It does. I'll turn it around on you as well. And I like to ask this to everybody more and more, to look at where do you have to most self-advocate for your own mental well-being on a given day or week? In essence, where are you most at risk?
So as an Enneagram 4, if we're going to look at it through the lens of the Enneagram, right? Man, 4s are the most complex number on the Enneagram. And as I mentioned earlier, they're disproportionately represented in the creative arts. They are people who, have grown up with this false belief that there's something wrong, something they can't quite name, that's not right about who they are, that differentiates them from the world and kind of makes them unworthy of belonging in the world. And so they need to become special and unique, right? And they create amazing things out of that sense of suffering, right? So as you can imagine, a place I might fall apart is envying other people who I think have the missing piece that I don't, right? So envy, a big issue for 4s is shame. This feeling that I'm not enough, right? Now that also happens to be one for 2s and 3s, just so you know.
I was going to say, when you said that, I thought imposter syndrome, which is just always my next door neighbor. Yeah.
So that's the 3's experience of shame, right? The 2 has a very different one. But all 3 of those types project different images, in order to win the love of others, because they don't believe they can be loved for who they are. And they're actually not very sure of who they are. So so ultimately, I know that that's going to be a struggle. I've done a lot of work around it. It's not what it was. I know when that story starts busting out, and I know to look at it with love and compassion and go, do you think you want to go back there today? You want to go back to that old story? Because it doesn't end well, right? So, I'm able to look at that when it goes on, and with a sense of humor, and to be able to smile at it, to befriend it and say, you used to make sense of my life. I appreciate it, but you don't really anymore. So why don't we try a different story,
When you look at, Ian, the mental health, crisis that we are in culturally, or I don't know, man, this isn't my study field, but the mental health crisis, or are we in a mental health awareness highlight, right? High point right now. Either way, when you look at that in regards to these stories, it has me wondering if you look at our culture and say, in unself-awareness, not being self-aware, we are just going to naturally fall into the worst interpretations of our stories. Is that?
Chances are you're actually trapped inside of an errant story full of mistaken beliefs, and limiting ideas or limiting perspectives on life, right? So just step back for 1 second about mental health crisis right now. I've been doing a lot of reading about this lately, and one of the things that the amount of research around news media, the amount of the flooding that our brains are getting in the news media, that of just 24-hour news cycle of everything that's going wrong in the world. Your body and brain are not built to take that much information in, particularly when there's nothing you can do to solve the problem. So, this is a great cause of mental health problems, anxiety and depression. Social media, proven problems among adolescents, particularly, where you see mental health issues now, of anxiety in particular, skyrocketing. A lot of it's social media. I don't have time to go into all the reasons why. And certainly loneliness is a huge epidemic in the world. So, there's a lot of reasons why the mental health crisis is what it is at present. I think, though, in the stories we tell ourselves, man, if we can start to figure out our Enneagram type and the story that type tells us about who we are, and we begin to deconstruct it and reconstruct a new story, it'll go a long way toward mitigating the worst of our problems in terms of mental health.
Ian, let me ask about loneliness. And it actually reminds me of something I was going to ask a moment ago in the relationship category. You had said, I don't know if it was in our part 1 talk or us talking offline, about you spend a lot of time with very high profile, sounds like men, specifically high profile men in the corporate world at incredibly high levels, working with them as, is it coach/therapist? Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say coach, therapist, spiritual director.
Okay. With them. And you said a lot of them are, we even talked about, a mastermind that you're a part of, and so many of them, they've accomplished an incredible amount as far as vocational success, career, business, and whatnot. And yet they often are at a point where they want something more. And I think you mentioned relationship is really at the forefront of that. How many of those people do you find that are struggling with loneliness? Because I think we talk about that, it's lonely at the top. Is it?
I mean, it absolutely is. I'd say that it's interesting, right? And Mike and I had lots of conversations about my starting this program, and because he'd had some experience with it, right? And we have not only people who are in business, but in top fields of sports and entertainment. And it's interesting that they're looking for safe spaces where they can be with experienced people to talk about the challenges they have. And I came in with all kinds of ideas about curriculum. We're going to teach this, we're going to teach that. And you know why these guys wanted to sign up for a second year? It's because they fall in love with each other. Right. And they don't want to lose those connections, because prior to coming, they were very lonely. Hmm. Now, loneliness is not the exclusive, it's not a, successful people don't have the market on loneliness. People of all kinds are struggling with loneliness today. So, but I would say that these guys at the very top of their game, it's just interesting because they are so successful that they struggle with the same issue of loneliness and isolation that everybody does. Hasn't solved any problems. And in fact, successful people have a real handicap, and that is this. They become so separate from the rest of the tribe because of their success. They're put up on a pedestal. And guess what? There's no room for other people on the pedestal. So they don't know who their friends are at that point. They've never had time because they've pursued success to create deep relationships with other people. So that is a handicap that they have.
Well, and it feels like you also find yourself in a place where you no longer, back in the day when we all lived in a village out somewhere, we all depended upon each other. You by proxy had to accommodate other people, and you needed them. Now, if you're at the top of the Fortune 500 list as Mr. CEO, who do you really need? Everybody does their thing. You take care of everything. You don't need anybody in that. That has always felt dangerous, and and I understand. You get to a point and you don't for survival, even for success there, you don't need anyone. And depending on your profile, then it feels weak to need as well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Work, career, and business. That is the next one. And, I'm interested with where you are. You've had your own evolution from, from pastor to now, coach and consultant. I mean, when we talk about motive, as you talk about at the core of the Enneagram 2 motive, where do you see a relevant trajectory as a 4, in essence, to the vocation you find yourself in today? You see the motivation connection.
Yeah, man, it's yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you a story. So I have in my life, at any given moment, I have a portfolio life, right? So I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I am a consultant coach with that demographic we were just speaking about. I am a therapist. I am a spiritual director. You know what I mean? Like, I have been a professional songwriter, an award-winning songwriter. I mean, I have had a really, really full life. Now, I remember driving across West Texas on the way to a speaking date one time, and I was like, who the heck am I? It's like, I have degrees all over the place. I have had multiple careers and vocations. Who am I? And then I realized en route, the motivation for all this is this. I have always wanted to be a person who wants to help people enter into a deeper conversation with the mystery of who they are and with the meaning of their lives. Now, that's why I became a therapist, a songwriter, an author. The kinds of books that I write are all about that. It's why I became a priest. It's why, you know what I mean? Like, so all of those things were feeding that one purpose or motivation. I deeply want to help people see who they are. I want to help them change to become better expressions of themselves. I want them to find a spirituality that brings them a sense of purpose and meaning in a world that sometimes feels arbitrary. So that's the whole of my life right there.
So reconcile that. Would you say that there was, even in because you were self-aware of that, or that was a saving grace that that value existed, and you could look back at that point of questioning and say, man, I'm so grateful that I at least stayed true to that value, that motive, amongst all these things, even though you may not have been consciously aware. You weren't sitting up there going, okay, I'm looking at doing this role. I know my motives. I know my propensities. I'm going to make sure that it fits it. Oh, here's how it does. I'm going to go after that. It was because I don't want to call it just a lucky thing. So I'm trying to find the connection. No. How would you state it?
Yeah, I think it's a both and thing, man. I mean, first of all, I was a kid that was, one of those unusual kids that was sort of very spiritually attuned. I journaled. I liked poetry. I liked songwriting. I wasn't honestly out there playing baseball. You know what I mean? Like, I was just kind of a quirky, artsy kind of kid. And I really, at a very young age, became concerned with sort of the bigger questions of life, right? A little earlier than other kids did. And I was a very sensitive kid, a very caring kid. And I was also a kid who went through a lot of stuff very, very early on that was painful. Growing up in a home, I mentioned this earlier, with a drug addicted and alcoholic father who died from that disease and left a lot of wreckage in his wake, and God bless him. He had a very, very tragic life. Now, I began to pursue that mission, if you will, of wanting to help people enter into deeper conversation with the mystery of their lives, with their suffering, with what's the meaning of their lives, the purpose of their lives. And it wasn't until I was in maybe 50 that I could look back at all those things I had chosen to do, and I realized every single one of them was meant to serve that mission, and that I had been doing all of them at different times. And, I still do. Sometimes I'm doing all three at once, or I'm using 4 at once. But it's all been for that reason. It was unconscious for a while. I think part of it was genetics. As a little kid, I just came into the world with those kinds of interests, but it also was something that just came together. I just grew into it, and it just took me a long time to figure out, oh, that's what I've been doing. No problem with a portfolio life. I'm not ADD. I'm actually doing all these different things for the same reason.
Yeah. The hope then I would want to offer folks is, in to the best that you can, becoming through the Enneagram, through your book, The Story of You and whatnot, becoming aware of what are those, let's say propensities, but you would say those motives. What are those core motives that are true to you? And then deciding, being more indecisive, aligning what you do with who you are. Is that the best way of saying it?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
What we want to find is alignment. Right.
Alignment.
We want to find continuity in our lives, so that we live with a sense of wholeness versus a sense of being fractured. We're all over the place.
In our lives, as opposed to being fractured. I'm sitting there writing that down. How many people feel fractured? We talked about that a bit in the beginning, or in part one of our talk together, of feeling fractured, of being over here. And I think I relate to this. I think a lot of the audience does. That again, we're doing these things, these self-help principles, these success principles, and they pay off here in these categories of life. And we feel we're doing the same things, and over here we're not getting results. And that is, man, I was frustrated with that, and I find so many people are frustrated with that. Especially, it's almost easier if everything's a wreck. Everything's a wreck. That makes sense. But over here, when you've got success in some areas and not in others, that feels, fractured is a good word. I haven't used that before, and that's a frustrating place to be, that you're helping people with. It's a big effort of my own book, and my own testimony is a big part of that too, is that's a frustrating place to be. And so fractured, I like that, alignment and continuity versus fracture. There's our next book. Money and finances and wealth is the next category, Ian. So tell me of your values as they, and I like to put in there money, finances, wealth, and even, possessions, whatever, all these things. Tell me about your values there.
It's so funny you're bringing this up right now, because, we live in a lovely home in Nashville. We've had, nice cars, and we take nice vacations, and we've had the benefits of a life that I didn't imagine when I was a kid. And right now we are in the process of getting rid of everything.
Wow. Why?
We are selling our beautiful home, and getting one that's half the size. We live in two different places during the course of a year, and we are just trying to get our life smaller. I want a smaller life. I have a friend, his name is Richard Rohr. You might know him. And
Sure.
Richard likes to say that the second half of life, that the first half of life is all about addition, and the second half of life is all about subtraction. And I think that's true. I think in the first half of life, you're trying to prove your value and your worth by adding more stuff to your life. And in the second half of your life, you realize that didn't work. And you realize that spirituality is all about getting rid of junk so you can get down to the most important business, which is the work of the soul. Right. So I've been around money. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. I've grown up around wealthy, successful people my whole dang life. And they're all as miserable as anybody else. And sometimes even more so, because they've sort of run out of ammo. It's like, oh, gee, I thought this was going to work, and I got here and it didn't. So, it's, to me, money is, it's nice to have money, I guess, but it certainly doesn't answer the fundamental problems of life at all. It just doesn't, and the faster we can get over that delusion, the better off we'll be. So we're just simplifying everything. We're trying to put our values into not getting things, but the pursuit of experiences. I'm not interested in cars anymore. I don't need more stuff, but I do want to see the greatest mountains. I want to spend a lot of time traveling with my children. I want to go to the great cathedrals to see if I can experience. I want to experience the spiritual in as many different places as I possibly can. So these are the kinds of reorientations that I'm trying to build into my life. I want to be as generous with my resources now as I possibly can. I hope, and I think it'll happen, I'm going out writing the last check. I've told my kids, if you're expecting anything, don't. Because I want to go out of here, writing out the last check. And I'm not a gajillionaire, but it's, I just want to go out making sure that I don't have anything left in the bank account because
Yeah.
it's all been kind of given away. And
That's,
so we are in a place of real change on money and wealth and possessions.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's good confirmation for me. I have found myself weary with just dealing with stuff. The more I own, it doesn't matter at some point, if, regardless of how much money, just owning stuff, that's an old adage. It owns you, and it really does. And so I look at another car or another home in another place, even that I've kind of soured on that because we're looking at, okay, every place that we like, let's just buy a house there. And we can, Airbnb it while we're not there, and we can do it. I just, at this point, I just rather go pay for somebody else's Airbnb, like you said, have the good experience. And I don't want to hassle with it. Whatever will lessen my hassle factor so I can have experiences. I appreciate that for you to experience the spiritual in as many places as possible.
Well, you know about the hedonic, gerbil wheel, right? The hedonic gerbil wheel is right. It's like hedonism. We're using that word, right? It's like, okay, well, boy, if I get the house, man, now I'll be happy. And of course, we have this problem called adaptation. You adapt to having the house, and it's after 2 weeks, it doesn't mean anything to you anymore. You've adapted to it. So now you got to go find something else. It's a horrible addiction.
It's so funny. I'm just falling off the wheel of, I was really going after a specific car that I wanted, and I found it. And the more I looked into it, I questioned that. I'm going to get the thing, and then 2 weeks later, am I really going to care to drive it more than what I know? Well, thank you. There's you just saved tens of thousands of dollars, and more than that. Just again, it was just a hassle factor. It's a really cool car, but it's just a hassle factor. All right, last one, talking about things of that. Well, we're on to that. You just mentioned it, but it's areas of interest, and areas of interest one, but I'm looking at a personal nature. And I used to talk about this in regards to self-care, personal pursuits, play, even fun. I do like the aspect of putting it in the frame of non-productive. It doesn't have to be, but the thing that you do just for you gives you energy, inspires you. It's not necessarily a productive activity in and of itself. Go.
Well, earlier I mentioned meditation, right? That's certainly one. I love yoga, man. I do. We do quite a bit of yoga, right? In our lives, and we take great pleasure in it. We take great pleasure in, like I mentioned earlier, just travel, hiking, putting ourselves in environments where the likelihood of our bumping into God is greater than in any other places in our life. And that's sort of my thing. It's like, I just want to go places where I'm apt to run into God, right? And when I say God, I'm not saying, I'm talking about spirituality here, right? I don't want to get into, as a Christian, as a Buddhist, or anything. You know what I mean? How about, I want to bump into the transcendent,
the divine,
when I'm on,
yeah.
So when I'm on top of a mountain, or if I'm hiking in the Dolomites, if I'm standing on the banks of, the Pacific in California, if I'm, what I'm saying? If I'm sitting in a symphony here in Nashville, listening to Elgar's Nimrod variations, it doesn't matter. I want to go and experience and say, where can I find God? Because here's the deal, Kevin. I believe that if you just scratch the surface of anything, you're going to find the face of God. Just scratch the surface of anything, and you're going to find God. So whether it's in nature, or it's in great music, if it's in, the working out that you do, the celebration of your body, you just get underneath the paint and you're going to find the face of God. And that's what I want to encounter as much as I possibly can in life.
I love that as a wrap up, even to just our focus here on the Enneagram as a tool to help us be self-aware, divest ourselves of our unhealthy selves, and open ourselves to the divine and the transcendent and the glory.
So can I just add one thing, and you can cut it out if you want, but the Enneagram actually, this is not original to me, reveals the face of God. Because if you look at the Enneagram diagram, what you'll find out is that each of those Enneagram types is a feature of the divine, which makes sense if you believe that we are made in the image of God,
Yeah.
right? So if you're a 1, you reflect the goodness of God. If you're a 2, the love of God. If you're 3, glory of God. 4, the pathos, the creativity, the suffering of God. 5, the omniscience of God. 6, the unfailing loyalty of God. 7, the joy of God. 8, the power and justice of God. 9, the peace of God. So that is a wonderful thing about the Enneagram, is it actually reveals the face of God when you look at all 9 types.
Do you have that list somewhere? If it's in the book, I missed it. Where can I get that list? Where can we
I'll
get
send
that
it to
list?
you.
Okay.
I'll get it to you.
Okay. I would love that list. That's profound. Thank you, Ian, man. Thank you. Thank you for this time. It has been a glorious, 2.5 hours now we're going on. Thank you. Thanks to Michael Hyatt for connecting us. He knows what he's talking about and connecting. I'm eager to continue to journey with you, to learn from you, to join you on your show, which we'll talk about, which is typology, that people will drive them to tune into as well. And great to hear we've got overlapping guests. It's been a gift. I'm the primary recipient of this, but I'm eager to share it with the audience. Ian, thank you. Thank you for what you've done here. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for giving me your time.
Thanks, Kevin. I enjoyed it.